Book one one's all about the books that I've read for the last 40 years. And today I have my special guest. He is award-winning author and the author of Chicago Trilogy, and other than Mr. Frank Joseph. Welcome, Mr. Frank, on Book 101 Review. And can you please introduce more about yourself that I miss?
Thank you, Daniel. Pleased to be here. My name is Frank Joseph. I am the author of the Chicago Trilogy, which has won a lot of different awards. It's set in Chicago at mid-century. I'll just tell you quickly. The pitch for it is it's about blacks and whites, Christians and Jews, how children view the world, conflict and forgiveness, uh, and Chicago at mid-century, a great city going up in flames. And many people who've read these books say Chicago is like a character in the novels. And Chicago, in case you're not sure, in case it isn't apparent by now, is where I grew up. And these novels are kind of the what if story of my growing up. They aren't the story of my growing up at all. Uh, they are the story of, geez, if my life had gone differently, what would it have been? And they are that story.
Mr. Frank, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. Thank you. And today, let's talk about the writing process of this award-winning piece. So, tell us was the initial or central idea or image that sparked the entire Chicago trilogy? Did you know from the beginning that it would be a multi-volume work, or did the story demand to be told in three parts as you wrote?
Very much not a multi-volume work. I started out writing To Love Mercy. This was a fair number of years ago, and I did not envision a trilogy at all. What I envisioned was this one story, um, uh, in which a black kid and a white kid encounter one another under the worst of circumstances after midnight in a dark parking lot following a White Sox baseball game, and a melee ensues in the dark over misunderstanding, and the white grandfather accidentally knocks over the black kid who breaks his nose and is rendered unconscious, and the white family has, after much soul searching, decides they have to take him to the hospital, and that's where the story starts. The white kid has is just overwhelmed uh, by these occurrences. Nothing like this has ever happened in his young life. And the next day, almost in a fog, almost in a state of hypnosis, he finds his way to the black kid's hospital bed, where the black kid wakes up, from being in a doze, wakes up, sees this kid here, and doesn't know what the kid is doing here, and doesn't want any part of him. But the kid says, "You got to help me. We have to find this thing, this silver thing that was a treasured thing of my grandfather's, this silver talisman, or he's going to put you in jail." And that starts the adventure that is the story of To Love Mercy, which is the first novel. And at the time I wrote it, I thought the only novel, but the novel did relatively well. And my publisher at the time helped me find an agent who said, write me three of them and I'll market them as the Chicago trilogy. And that's how the three novels were born. It was no more complicated than that.
Interesting trilogy, Mr. Frank. And Chicago is much as a character as setting in your work. How did you approach the challenge of making the city feel alive and consistent across the three books, while also allowing to evolve through different time periods or perspectives?
Those are great questions. The answer is as simple as could possibly be. Chicago is my hometown. I don't live there anymore. I haven't lived there since 1969. But I was born. I'm an old guy. I'm an old guy, but I'm not a dead guy. I, I was born in 1940 in Chicago Lying-in Hospital on the south side of Chicago, and I lived in the city or the suburbs for the first 29 years of my life. And these three novels pretty much cover those periods. The first one is set over 5.5 days in 1948, and it takes the kids, the black kid and the white kid, who are 10 and 11 years old at the time. Um, and the second novel, which I think of as the high school novel, takes place over 5 years in the mid 50s, where these two boys who have this 5.5 day adventure, an overnight adventure, but realize because of what race is like in America in the late 40s and how blacks and whites really don't speak to one another in a social way, they realize as they part, watching the sun come up over Lake Michigan, they realize as they part that they can't be friends, that, the relationship ends here. But then it doesn't. 5 years later, they're both going to the same high school, and they're both in the bathroom one time, which is where kids go to smoke, and they're not supposed to do that, but they do. And so the black kid is inside a stall finishing a cigarette, and the white kid's outside, and he says, "Is that you?" And the kid comes out, and that's how they rejoin each other. And that novel takes place all over the course of high school through their teen years. Um, and then the third novel, which is called To Do Justice, is I can't give away how the characters got there, because I don't want to spoil it for your readers. But the two boys are not the protagonists of the third novel. They are two females. One is an 11-year-old kid named nicknamed Pinky, who is very light skinned, but who's got a black parent and a white parent. She's a mixed race child, and she's being raised by a shiftless woman named Jolene in a very, bad part of town. Um, I don't want to call it a ghetto. People don't like using that word anymore, and I understand why, but it's that kind of neighborhood. And I like to say, and I hope this doesn't cause any offense to you or your readers, she's being she looks white, but she thinks black, and but she knows that her birth mother was a white woman, and she is obsessed with finding this woman and finding who the secret of her birth is. But she doesn't know who the father is, and that's the spoiler that I can't release. So that may be more explanation than you want, but that's kind of how things go.
Award winning trilogies often have a unifying theme, Mr. Frank, that binds them. What is the core philosophical or human question that connects all three books? And how did your understanding of that theme deepens as the trilogy progress?
Well, one of those themes is the city of Chicago, which you asked me earlier and I didn't really answer. Um, was How is Chicago a character in these novels? I love Chicago. I don't live there anymore. I haven't lived there in 50 years. But as they say, you can take the boy out of Chicago, but you can't take the Chicago out of the boy. Um, when I wanted to write a story of Chicago, but also I had some things in mind that I wanted to do. I was very, very taken with the idea how black people in America and white people in America experience the same thing and see it so differently. You might call it the Rashomon effect. And I wanted to write about that. And so I had to figure out mechanisms to do that. And the mechanism that I figured out was first person, multiple first person narrators. So we start out in the voice of the white kid. Um, and then in the second chapter, we shift to the voice of the black kid. And and the two chapters talk about the same events, but through a very different lens. And I go on and, you know, and I just I always have that in the back of my mind as I'm writing through, through this trilogy. And another thing that I want is these are novels set far back in the past. They're set in 1940, in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and not, a lot of people who lived in those years are no longer with us, and I'm one of the fossils, one of the dinosaurs. But so they're historical novels, they're period novels, but I wanted to write novels in which I never breathed a word about the present. I did never whisper about the present, but I want the reader to be thinking about the present in every word that I write because of the echoes with, how
Interesting, Mr. Frank. Let's talk about the architecture and structure. Structuring a trilogy is a monumental task. Did you plot the entire arc of all three books before writing the first stone, or did you discover the direction book by book, leaving yourself room to respond to the character's development? Mr. Frank?
I wish I could have done it the way you described it first, but I'm, I am I am not capable of that. They say there are writers who are plotters and writers who are pantsers. I'm a pantser. I write by the seat of my pants. But I do that to the extent that I can. So in other words, I really didn't know where I was going in this trilogy. I did know, that I wanted to write a trilogy, and that when my publisher, the person who published the first novel, his name was Patrick, um, said, and Patrick and I knew each other. We had a history together. We covered those riots together, the riots during the mid '60s on the south and west sides of Chicago. We covered them together, and he said, "You got to write about the riots." And I said, "Yeah, yeah, I do have to write about the riots, and the but was that there's another novel in the way. There's another novel in the middle, and that was To Walk Humbly, the high school novel, book two. And so I had to write that first before I could write the Riots novel. And the Riots novel is the last novel to do justice, book three, which has really won a lot of awards. It was it was Book of the Year, runner up for Book of the Year from the Chicago Writers Association for independent fiction. It got a rave review from Kirkus Reviews, which said, gave it a buy it recommendation. It was an indie reader best book. It just won a lot of awards, and so did all three of them too. But To Do Justice particularly did, and it's book three of the three books. Um, I think you asked me about the writing process, and I'm straying a bit. But the writing process was, I find my way into the middle of the book where I invariably get stuck. And at that point, I have to start plotting. I pants my way into the middle of the book, and then I have to start asking for help. And the way I typically ask for help is I'll find a sympathetic ear and say, "Can I sit down with you and just sort of talk this out?" And I have particularly one woman named, a very lovely woman named Linda, who's one of my writing buddies. And I've gone over to her house on more than one occasion saying, "Linda, I'm stuck. Can you help me?" And we'll just, we'll sit on her screen porch and we'll talk about it for half an hour. And invariably, I start finding my way out almost almost at once. And so it's kind of an imprecise and stumbling writing process, but it does seem to get the job done. Although I will say, getting into the middle gets worse with each novel.
Mr. Frank, how did you manage the balance between making each book a satisfying, self contained story while ensuring they all serve the larger, overarching narrative of the trilogy?
That's a wonderful question. And believe me, I wanted all three books to be freestanding. The first book, of course, that wasn't a problem because the second and third weren't envisioned. But the second one was kind of a problem because I'd never done this before, never written a trilogy, much less never written a second novel. And so I had to be really careful because there are several places in the novel where I have to, where I have to reveal the backstory without crippling the novel and making it not freestanding. These aren't, to be continued adventures. These are one large, as you I think you used the term overarching. That's a fine term. Um, I'm trying to tell an overarching story in three segments, rather widely separated. Um, the first two are 4 years apart, and the second two are 9 years apart. Yeah, that's right, 9 years apart. The last one takes place during the riots during the summer of 1965 and the summer of 1966, and that story picks up 9 years after the prior stories. Well, it isn't freestanding either. It is the third novel in a trilogy, and it has to make sense to those who have read the other two, but it also has to stand alone so that so that readers can read it and not feel the the requirement to go back and read the others. Although, of course, I hope they will.
Mr. Frank, what was the most significant plot knot you had to untangle across the three books? A thread in a book one that you did not know how to resolve until book three?
Hmm. I've never been asked that question before. Uh, I I don't. I'm trying to say. Oh, actually, yeah. I think I do know. Um, I didn't know. I didn't know I didn't know what book three was going to be. I knew book three was going to be during the riots. I knew it was going to be 9 years after book two ended, and I'd had these two boys were the protagonists of book one and book two. Um, and in book two, a there's a party that takes place looking late in the book. And once again, I have to remind you and your listeners, we're in 1950s America, and it's still very much a racially, divided place, and the races tend, they don't mix. But in this particular high school, Hyde Park High School on the south side of Chicago, it had it had a large black population and a large white population, and of course the kids do mix because they are kids and they are high schoolers, and so they do something a little racy for the time. They have parties together, and they call them, black and white parties. They call them zebra parties. Black for the black and white stripes of the zebra. So I have this, I have this marvelous scene in the party. I have a couple of marvelous scenes, or at least I think they are. I like them a lot, where the kids are planning the party and then when the party itself actually takes place. And at that party, a crucial event takes place, which I rather not disclose to your listeners because I want them to read these novels, and these are going to be spoiler alerts. But something occurs, um, it, that is the trigger and the setup for the third novel, and dictates who who the protagonists of the third novel are. And as I said earlier, they aren't the same people. They are an 11-year-old girl of mixed race whose nickname is Pinky because she looks, almost like a white person. Um, and a 23-year-old reporter for the Associated Press whose name is Molly, who they encounter one another, and Molly, kind of becomes Pinky's guide and mentor and savior and helper and facilitator. Oh, and to finish my thought, which I almost lost, I'm I'm in a hotel. You asked for the thread. This isn't exactly a thread, but let me just tell you about it anyway. I'm in Chicago, visiting in Chicago, which is where I no longer live, and I'm in a hotel room on the north side, and a terrible storm hits, and all the airports are closed. Well, I figure no problem, I can get home. I have a train ticket. Well, I couldn't get home because there were wires down on the train tracks, and so the trains weren't running either. So I'm just stuck in this hotel room for 4 days. And I'm sitting there, looking at the walls, trying to think what to do. And all of a sudden, the character of Pinky floats down from somewhere in heaven and into my mind and starts speaking to me, as characters have sometimes done in my experience writing fiction. They just come out of nowhere and they just start talking to you. And it was like a gift from the gods, because I just started writing down what Pinky was saying to me, and she became the one of the two protagonists of the third novel, which I didn't know who the characters were going to be and how I was going to get to them. And that zebra party that takes place in the second novel sets it up, and then this experience where Pinky just floats down and manifests herself to me is how she comes into being.
Mr. Frank, let's talk about the character evolution and continuity. How do you track the emotional and psychological journey of your main characters across the entire trilogy?
Um, I think of myself as a rather empathetic person. I love voices. I love fictional voices. And as I have mentioned before, all three of these novels are written in first person narrators, but multiple first person narrators. There are four in the first novel, five in the second novel, and two in the third novel. And in the third novel, both of them are women, and I'm a man, of course. And a lot of men, have trouble writing in the voices of women. For some reason, that wasn't a problem for me at all. I just think what it is, we novelists we're kind of like actors, except we have to play every part, and that's our job as novelists, is to inhabit every character fully, and just the same. And when we're writing in the voice of a 65-year-old black woman from Sunflower, Mississippi, with a second grade education, we have to be her while we're writing her chapter. And when we're writing in the voice of a 23-year-old, you know, unsure of herself Associated Press reporter, who, totters around in her heels and is 20 pounds overweight, we have to be her. Um, we have to be every character. We have to be the night watchman who is actually who is mentally not quite all there. Um, and he's a very pivotal character in the first novel. So so I think that's the answer to your question. It comes back down to empathy, and hopefully, I have enough of it to do the job right.
Mr. Frank, writing a trilogy means living with your character for years. How did How did your relationship with them change? And it was it difficult to say goodbye to them after the third book was complete.
It was,
Is it?
yeah. I'm laughing because that's a laugh of appreciation. Sure, it's always hard to say goodbye to your characters. Um, I I when I'm in the middle of these novels, I'm in their world as much as I am in yours. I have more than once had the experience of, kind of being with people, perhaps, at dinner in a restaurant or something like that, and trying to carry on a conversation, whereas in fact my brain is 50 years in the past, and somewhere on the south side of Chicago. um, when you're deep into the writing of a novel, you are in a way more in that world than you are in the world of day-to-day living. So you go to sleep at night and they're with you, you wake up in the morning, they're with you. If they're with you enough, you sort of can't wait, to start finding out what the next thing is they're going to do. And a lot of times when I'm sitting at the keyboard writing a character, I don't know what the character is going to say until the character says it. And don't ask me where that comes from, because that's just how it is, and it's always like that.
How did you approach introducing a new character in the later books without making them feel like late additions? And how did you decide with the characters from the first book deserve to have their arcs continue or conclude?
The first two books are are kind of, they're more like one book than the third book is like the other two. I don't want to say they're disconnected, because they're not. But the first two, the have the same protagonists, Steve and Sass, and they're 10 and 11 in the first book, and they're high school age in the second book. Sass, the black kid, is 1 year older than Steve, the white kid. Um, but they're pretty close, and they've grown up. They both are children of the South Side of Chicago, although back in those days those neighborhoods were rigidly segregated, and they grew up 30 blocks apart, 30 blocks from one another, but in completely different worlds. And those worlds, it's the crossing of those worlds, it's the coming to an understanding of those worlds that makes up so much of what those two novels are about. The third novel, as I say, I can't say how. I can't say I, I can't say how these two female characters come to be, because that would be giving away something I don't want to give away. But they are they are very, very logically connected to the characters in the other. um, and those two protagonists from the first two novels, who loomed so large in the first two novels, one of them, Steve, is a character in the third novel, but he's not a protagonist. He's an important character, but he's a player. He's an adjunct. The other character, Sass, is a presence in that novel, but for reasons, again, that would be kind of a spoiler to let you know what they are. he doesn't he does not have physical existence in the third novel. Does that answer your question? Am I missing something?
No, Mr. Frank. You answered the question correctly, and the writing craft and revision. The voice and prose style of a trilogy can evolve. Did you consciously work to maintain a consistent authorical voice, or did you allow the style to shift to reflect a changing tone and themes of each book?
I most certainly did not allow an authorial voice to enter here. You never hear an authorial voice in any of these three novels. The voices you hear are only the characters' voices, because every voice is first person. But the first to speak in the first novel is Steve, the 10-year-old white kid. The second to speak is Sass, the 11-year-old black kid. The third to speak is Dora, a 65-year-old black woman who is kind of the glue of the novel, who is the person who straddles both the white world and the black world. And the fourth narrator, who comes in very late. You asked earlier a question about characters coming in late in the novel, and how do you handle that? That can be a problem. There's no question about that. This character, Joseph, the night watchman, who I think I mentioned briefly, the night watchman who finds the kids in trying to break in to the office of the grandfather's theater in this continuing attempt, failing attempt to find this missing silver talisman, this precious silver talisman. Um, uh, I didn't know who Joseph was, and he does come in very late, and and I was with my wife. I live in the Washington D.C. area now, and I was with my wife and visiting for the first time to the Museum of Visionary Art in Baltimore, Maryland, which is one of the most extraordinary art museums anywhere in America. It's certainly one of the most extraordinary art museums I've ever seen. And a lot of the art there is by crazy people, quite frankly. So we're marveling at some of these very imaginative works of art. And we're touring the museum. We start on the top floor and we're working our way downwards. And at some point, I get the flash about the insight that explains the character of Joseph, who I really don't know. I don't know who this character is, and he's coming in very late in the novel. And I realize Joseph is crazy. And that's the key to his character. And so I start doing a lot of investigation into the voices of crazy people, which is not as easy as it might sound. Might not even sound easy, and it isn't easy. um, I found a website of a guy who was quite certifiably crazy, and his name was Terry. And um, and so I listened to an awful lot of the things that he posted until finally I realized it was getting a little boring. Terry was kind of repeating himself, and his paranoid schizophrenia was, no longer real interesting. And so I just said, well, I can't do it that way. Joseph is just going to be crazy in his own way. And so I started writing Joseph as if he's he's nuts in his own way. And really I just I just trotted out the old empathy and tried to be that character. And my publisher, Patrick, who published that novel, he for his money, Joseph is the best character in the novel. He loves Joseph. So I think, for at least that one reader, I did my job.
Mr. Frank, before we wrap up our discussion for today, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, people. My other podcast, because my abstract essay is already in fifth season. Abstract poetry in second season. I'm a book 101 review in fifth season too. Comedy 101 in second season. I'm a food 101 in fifth season as well. Geography 101 in fourth season. And my baby podcast, Law 101 and Mental Health 101, Love Letters in fourth season, as well as my movie 101 review, music 101, and science 101 and sex 101 in its second season. Please listen to them wherever you listen your podcast. So, Mr. Frank, having completed this epic journey, what is one piece of advice you would give to a novelist just starting out who dreams of writing a connected series or trilogy?
Right from the heart. That is my advice. Right from the heart. Right Write what you feel deepest in your heart. Don't worry about fashion. Don't worry about what's popular, because you can't know anyway, because by the time your book comes out, it may not be popular anymore. Don't write about dragons and things like that unless you really love dragons. Uh, write what's in your heart. That is my advice to writers and readers everywhere.
Mr. Frank Joseph, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world through your charity. So can you please invite our listeners to support your books as well as any advocacy that you are doing right now?
No, actually, I'm busy trying to make these books go. I should be writing, but I'm not. Daniel, thank you so much for having me.
You are most welcome, Mr. Frank Joseph. But so where do people can buy your trilogy?
They can get it. They can get them on Amazon. They can get them at Goodreads. They can get them at Barnes and Noble, Books a Million, everywhere books are sold. Or go to my website, frankjoseph.com. It's real simple, frankjoseph.com, and there are links there to where you can get the books. And I hope everybody who's listening will read these novels and love them as much as I loved them as I was writing them, quite frankly.
Yes, people, let's support Mr. Frank Joseph because if you support him, for sure, more and more empowering legacy to come. So, Mr. Frank, thank you so much for your legacy to the world.
Thank you, Daniel.
More to come, people. See you soon.